So, I started playing The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom a few weeks ago, and let me tell you, this game is definitely a masterpiece. I'm around 100 hours in now at the time of uploading this video, and the world, the exploration, the gameplay, it's just so well designed, really. It improves upon Breath of the Wild so much, basically every way. Of course, I am a little late to the party, considering that the game's been out for over 2 months now as I'm recording this, but I still want to share my thoughts on some of the main aspects of the game, while also exploring an idea that a game can be considered a masterpiece, in quotes, whilst not being perfect. Because while I do really love this game, it isn't perfect. There are some glaring problems with it that I'm going to point out in this video. I'm going to share my thoughts on the brilliantly designed feel and presentation of the game, how the simple joy of exploring the world has been elevated and increased in depth literally from Breath of the Wild, and the poor direction that they took with the story and temples, in my opinion. Let's get to it. I'm going to start by talking about what you're probably going to notice first, the presentation of the game, like visuals, sound, that kind of thing. The visuals are pretty similar to Breath of the Wild, like the graphics resolution hasn't been upgraded that much, but the music has been really expanded on. I'm going to start by talking about what you're probably going to notice first, the presentation of the game, like visuals, sound, that kind of thing. The visuals are pretty similar to Breath of the Wild, like the graphics resolution hasn't been upgraded that much, but the music has been really expanded on, how it slowly adds more chants as you get farther in. And the battle music actually changes notes and melodies based on various different factors like HP, amount of enemies, and the type of enemies you're fighting. The amount of complexity added isn't always noticeable, but it really does help in making the game just a little more interesting in situations that are usually kinda repetitive, like the combat. And of course, in dungeons, it makes for a really eerie atmosphere, which really lends to the whole vibe. Additionally, the way this game feels to play compared to its predecessor is completely different. Because I went in already knowing the general map layout from Breath of the Wild, exploration wasn't as much about long journeys that end up taking you halfway across the map before you even realize it. Rather, there was a lot more teleporting, jumping around to different places all over the world, because there are a bunch of various smaller things that I wanted to check out to see how they might have been changed. This, and movement generally being easier, due to flying machines in the towers, was the main reason the game felt different to play compared to the first game. Methods of transport and movement actually make a really big difference here in how you approach the world. In this case, it is mainly by showing you everything from a completely different perspective, from above the world in the sky. This is partially covered in the last section, but that change in perspective is also related to why gameplay, exploring in particular, is much more fun here. With the addition of smaller islands in the sky, you can always see something above you to check out, or something down below on the surface. This then leads to the question of how to get there. Do you shoot up to the sky using the new Skyview towers? Maybe use recall on one of those falling stones. You can use the new Zonai parts to make a flying machine. You can even ride the updraft from a dragon if you're good enough at that. Once you get up to the sky islands, many of them also have puzzles or shrine quests that challenge your Zonai contraption building skills even further than the normal shrines. The Sky Island's purpose is definitely to get players to think about different ways of using the Zonai parts, mainly for getting around the world, and they succeed at this. However, the sky isn't the only place providing the experiences. We also need to look down below, diving into the the depths. If the Sky Islands are all about free, open exploration and puzzles, the depths are definitely designed then to test your skills in combat with tighter, more closed-off environments. The first time diving into the depths was so cool and mysterious because the chasms just keep going down, and suddenly everything's pitch black, and maybe a frog suddenly jumps out to nuke your face before you even land on the ground. The depths are honestly probably my favorite new part of the game. They almost feel like the actual dungeon of the game, just all these dark chasms and caves filled with enemies and mines that you need to wander through. The depths is also where you're going to be getting the strongest weapons and all the charges you need for your Zonai batteries. It may seem grindy saying that, but the depths is the perfect place for working on Zonai contraptions, especially weapons, due to the large variety of enemies found there. A decent amount of the story content is also found in the depths, though, in my opinion, that's where this game's main weakness lies, in its story. I'm just going to say it straight out to start with. Tears of the Kingdom does not have a good story, at all, really. It pretty much copies the same formula as is in Breath of the Wild. Go to the four corners of the world, then go to Hyrule Castle and defeat Ganon. They make it a bit more interesting at the end by adding in a fifth sage, but that fifth dungeon was so tedious and such a slog to get through, I would argue it only made the story worse. However, the main campaign, being pretty much copy-pasted formula-wise, isn't what really disappoints me about it. That'd be two other things: the Tears of the Dragon questline and the temples. Prior to Tears of the Kingdom's launch, and even before it was given a proper name, what I was really excited for from the trailers was that the game seemed as though it would have a much more involved story, that we would actually be playing through major events that in Breath of the Wild would have been left as memories. Now that the game has released, though, we know that not to be the case. What really bugs me about the Tears of the Dragon questline is that instead of making the story told there something you can play through and interact with, a video game, they instead opted for the same style as Breath of the Wild, and basically made that questline just a movie to watch. Now that wouldn't be a problem if the playable story had more intense moments, action, like what the Tears of the Dragon memories show, but instead, we just get a basic story, copy-pasted one at that, and some cutscenes to show what could have been one of the coolest parts of the game to actually play through. Imagine we actually got to go back in time and got to meet Rauru, Sonia, even fight Ganondorf in the past so that he won't reawaken in the future. It was just such a missed opportunity, and they could have just made it so much more interesting. As for the temples, they disappointed me because, just like the other aspects of the game, the style is pretty much copied over from Breath of the Wild. You have a handful of points in the temple, you have to get to them all, and then you unlock the final boss at the center, you beat it, and that's all. Granted, the temples are still better than the Divine Beasts, The music is exceptional, being dynamically changing depending on how many points you've triggered in the dungeon, as I mentioned in an earlier section. The bosses are also way more fun to battle, especially Colgera and Queen Gupta. Ultimately, the main problem with the temples just stems from the approach that the devs are taking in designing them, in my opinion. If you compare the dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild to older Zelda games, it becomes clear that a more open, free design is being applied in these more recent entries. I can understand why the approach is being taken. I mean, the main point about Breath of the Wild and sequel is that they let you just go around a massive open world and do whatever you want, however you want. But still, I feel like this same style just doesn't work as well for dungeons, though I am in the minority on that, probably. A dungeon, to me, is supposed to be a more linear experience, usually featuring closed-off corridors and rooms and a darker atmosphere. You know, a mysterious mood to the whole thing. The temple in the Gerudo Desert gets this right, but the others are all just too open and are much worse as a result. Even if they did a linear style of dungeons badly, that would still be better than copying the same formula from Breath of the Wild. I will say, while the story was underwhelming, the final boss was easily one of the most epic fights ever. Ganon's health bar extending to the end of the screen and then needing to flurry rush his flurry rush of your original flurry rush was really cool. It was also quite challenging, as I only had 10 hearts when I first fought him, and I was brought down to 2, which was quite nice and refreshing from how all the other fights in the game were pretty easy. I want to now bring us back to my other goal with this video, as I mentioned in the introduction. I just said a whole lot of bad stuff in the last section about Tears of the Kingdom, yet I still think the game's a masterpiece. Why is that? Let's start by defining what a masterpiece actually is. For some, it means that the game is completely perfect in every way, there just aren't any flaws. But honestly, that's pretty unrealistic, right? Like, no game will be perfect in every way. There's always going to be something wrong with it, something small even. But there's also a lot of games that have so much work put in and are so close to being ideal that they deserve to be recognized in some kind of way. That's why I prefer to consider a game a masterpiece in something, in quotes. Like a masterpiece in story, or a masterpiece in art design. In the case of Tears of the Kingdom, it's a masterpiece in gameplay and game design. Because when playing it and just exploring, combat, making Zonai contraptions, that is easily the most fleshed out part of the game. It just works so well. The way I see it, the story wasn't even supposed to be the main focus. It was just designed to be a vehicle, maybe a Zonai vehicle, capable of carrying the player around the world to make use of all the new gameplay features. Ultimately, in the 100 hours that I've played Tears of the Kingdom so far, it's definitely left me satisfied. The world feels new while building off the old one, gameplay is completely shaken up with the Zonai devices and the new ruins added in, and the game as a whole is just fun to explore and wander in, which is the main point of the game. Sure, the story left a lot to be desired, but I still believe that the game is a masterpiece in the end, despite that single but major shortcoming. Not everyone may think that though, so I want to hear in the comments. Do you think Tears of the Kingdom is a masterpiece? Do you think that the story is bad? Share your thoughts. With that concluded, we're at the end of the video. If you found this video enjoyable to watch, leave a like or even subscribe. I would really appreciate it, especially now with these videos taking way longer to make. If you have any thoughts on Tears of the Kingdom, or want to talk about the game, leave a comment. I usually get around to all of them since, I don't get many of them. Anyways, see you all next video.